same old highway.
Welcome back to Leading from the Lake House, Leadership Unfiltered. I am Todd Waltz, CEO of Community Impact Organization, and I am here today again with Dr. Joe Wiley and Wendy Reichert. And today's topic, we are going to discuss fish or cut bait. Do you coach, redeem? Do you reassign? Or do you release or terminate an employee? And that's one of the hardest leadership calls that we ever have to make, especially when you walk into a mess that you didn't create. So imagine that you're the leader of a organization. It's very dysfunctional. Morale is very low. The board expects some big things very quickly. You've got even some saboteurs that are damaging other staff. And so what do? Do you keep the team or do you let them go and start all over again? We are going to hit that topic, and we come from three different perspectives. I'm a leadership coach. I love to coach people. However, I also realize that people have to want to be coached. And so if that's not where they're at, kind of going along, coaching them and trying to rehabilitate them or redeem them is going to be very difficult. And even reassigning is going to be difficult. So there's just sometimes in my mind where I know the best decision is just to cut bait in some form or fashion. And we're going to talk how you actually do that. So there's many different ways and different things that you have to take into consideration. But Dr. Joe, what's your perspective when it comes to reassigning or redeeming or releasing?
Well, I think it's interesting. I've had some varied experiences in my career. I worked in the public school setting where you had parameters such as unions and processes that you need to follow based on negotiated contracts to counsel people out of the job or reassign them to other roles. And then I've also worked in the government sector on the federal contracting side for the last 16 years. And I've had to try to mesh what I know and what I've been taught with some of what you've talked about is that sometimes people aren't good for an organization. I think that when looking at how do we get the best out of an organization, there's always a lot of pieces where you've got to kind of look at the people, look at the organization, what the goals are, and how to do it in a way that's humane and going to let you be able to sleep at night.
Yes, I agree. Wendy, what's your perspective?
So I probably fall somewhere in between both of you. I'm very willing to invest in the people that we have, the employees, and also work with them. But I'm also willing to say that their behavior can't stay within the organization. If we need to terminate someone that's underperforming or damaging the culture, then it's time to cut ties with them.
Yeah, and one thing that I always hold, dear to is you can't build a healthy future on a toxic foundation. I've always heard the saying, and some people agree with it, some people don't. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts of hire slowly, fire quickly. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when I look at jobs, I think that's one of the hard parts when you come from like public education because you're looking at people from a very humanistic perspective and always thinking about what will happen to them if they leave. Now, the ironic thing is that in schools, you could leave one school and go to another one. I think one of the things that I try to look at is what damage is being done and what is the value of what you say, fire quickly and hire slowly.
Yeah.
What do you want your organization to become? One of the things that I think happens in the settings that I've worked in is when people have historical knowledge, when people have historical understanding of systems, when they built pieces of the infrastructure and you're coming in and there's not a lot of people that you can transition or punt that work to, you have to be careful not to, what they say, cut your nose to spite your face. That's the hard part. And whenever you get rid of people, whether it's to send them somewhere else or just to say you have to leave here, one of the things that you really have to spend a lot of time thinking about is how much work will it create for you? Because typically you're going to have to work harder if you push someone out of a role that's needed in the functioning of the organization.
Yeah. How about you, Wendy? Hire slowly, fire quickly.
I totally agree with both of those because I think a lot of times everyone is, especially in the nonprofit world, everyone is so understaffed that you tend to hire more quickly than you probably should. Is that the right fit for what you were looking for? Or is it just filling that void that you have to help offload some of that work? So it's very almost strategic in how you do that. So I think that hiring slowly helps you pick the right person. I really like to interview, I wouldn't say all the applicants that you get for that position, but interview a lot of people. That way you get the feel. And most of the time, your gut instinct is the person that you need to hire. They might not have all the qualifications, but is that something that they can bring to the table and bring outside knowledge in with them and grow in that position. So just because they might not check off all the boxes for you um, in that particular role doesn't mean that they wouldn't fit well within your organization. So those are things that you have to look at and look for. As far as letting people go, by all means, if they're not performing and you've had your performance contracts in place with them, make sure that they are aware of what their job duties are and also discuss with them what they're not performing on. Maybe they're better at something else. Maybe you can rearrange some of their roles to take out what they're underperforming. So those are things I like to look at because it is very expensive and time consuming to not only hire people, but then also terminate people at that point.
Yeah, I agree. And I think from that saying, the perspective is that if you take your time in the hiring process, and I said this, from the other end, as a candidate, you really need to become a forensic investigator of that organization because they're only going to tell you what they want to tell you. Well, I think the same is true when you're hiring. We've got to be looking for those red flags or those warning signs and do our due diligence. I've been in that spot where I thought, wow, this is like a miracle. I can't even believe this person walked in here and I hired them. Wendy, you were one of those. I hired you and it was like best thing that ever happened to us. And, but I can very distinctly at the same organization remember another one where somebody was leaving unexpectedly and then this other person comes in and I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. Oh no, it was not a miracle, it was a nightmare, but really more due diligence would have helped with that. Now, COVID changed a lot because there is a lot of competition now with candidates. And some organizations have kind of gone overboard with all the interviewing and it's a 6 interview process and you got to take this test and that test and give us a writing sample. And that's the extreme because I've seen organizations actually lose good candidates because they take too long. But at the same time, we've got to have that due diligence. And then on the fire quickly side, that philosophy, I believe, comes from that we cling to a false hope that this person is not working out. We've seen the writing on the wall, but oh, we're gonna try. And no matter what you do, it's just not gonna work. Especially if it's behavioral issues or insubordination. It's part of their character. And so for me, it's what are the red flags for me before I'm going to, cut bait. Some of the big triggers are character issues. So if you're dishonest or you manipulate or you're gossiping and destroying the culture, then that's something that I'm not willing to tolerate. Chronic resistance to healthy change, always battling the same person every single time you're trying to make a change that's for the better of the organization. Not that they're raising valid questions, but actively battling that change and undermining, which leads into the third one, which is culture sabotage, undermining the leadership, dividing the team. Those are things that rarely are correctable. And so it's just time to cut bait and let's move forward and find somebody who is a real team player.
And I was going to say to your point that the cultural sabotage is a really difficult one because I think a lot of times what happens is everybody doesn't come in really understanding like why we're here, right? I think when we get a job, there's a couple of components to it. One, what were you raised to believe about work, right? Are you a hard worker or is it just to pay your bills? Is it a career for you? How important is education and skills and people actually having the skill, like you talked about, Wendy, matching up with the work as opposed to being trainable? Some people can have the skills and be the worst employee you ever have. Some people cannot have them and be trainable and you can bring them along. I struggle with the cultural sabotage part because oftentimes when we come into organizations, the people are already there, right? And they've already established these behaviors and these practices. And then you come in because somebody thought you were a bright light and you could bring change to the organization. And then you really got to sell yourself to the people that you'll be supervising that your way is the way we should do things. And I've had a few experiences working with smaller groups of people. And I'd be curious at your thoughts about so when you have cultural sabotage and it's a small group versus I've had 100 people that I supervise. So we're talking about 8 versus 100. And what does that really look like? And how do you address it in the organization? Sometimes things can be ignored, to your point, Todd, and just by keeping on giving the right message, you can change behavior. And then sometimes you have to address it head on when you have smaller groups because one person out of 7 could ruin 4. So I'm just curious about what you guys think about that because that's really a struggle for me trying to figure out when and when not to address cultural sabotage.
Yeah, I'm pretty much a confront head on. I mean, I'll sit somebody down. I'm not gonna beat around the bush or send a message through somebody else. If it's happening, it's a sit down one-on-one, and this is not acceptable. This cannot be tolerated. This is what I need to see for us to move forward. And I'll be honest with you, I've been on the flip side of that. I was doing some writing this week, and if you recall the movie from, I don't know, I don't know, 2015, 2014, Divergent. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but basically, people in this movie are classified into 3 different factions, and if you had all elements from each faction, you were considered divergent. Why? Because you could actually think for yourself. That was like, hey, that's kind of what a visionary leader feels like. You just feel like a divergent. You're like so different from everybody else. But being in a visionary leader when I'm not in a leadership position has been difficult because you come up with all these great ideas and you pass them up the chain and people there aren't ready. I always felt like I was 10 years ahead of where everybody else was. Not that it made me great, but
Mhm.
they weren't ready. They didn't see it. And so as a visionary leader, I would just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Like, hey, we need to do this. We need to do this. At one place I was a co-op marketing and advertising coordinator, and I could see the big picture of doing sponsorships with the major league sports teams and stuff like that, and was really trying to get the company to do that, and they were not just ready to do that. Well, all my pushing was eventually construed as being counter to the culture, and I basically worked myself out of a job
Mhm.
because people just got tired of hearing it. Well, lo and behold, 10, 20 years later, guess what this company's doing? Sponsoring major league teams and stadiums and all that stuff. I've been on both sides, and it's just I've grown as a visionary and as a leader, and it's like when people aren't ready, you either have to come alongside and coach them to get them there, or you just need to back up and wait till the timing is right to do that. And I think some people, when it comes to the culture, it's just easier to be that saboteur than it is to work on the timing and helping other people to come along.
And I think Todd, where you and I were in the nonprofit and working together, I think we came in, and that's what I tend to see and find out is that people are stagnant where they're at, and they're not ready to move forward. And it's almost like you have to. It's lead by example. So if you start doing it, they'll come along. If those people don't come along, then it's probably time to cut ties with those people. But you have people when you come into an organization and you're new, and like you said, you have all those ideas and stuff, you almost have to make it their idea at some point so that they jump on board with you. It's like, are you going to get on this train or not? So
Yeah.
that's one of the hard parts is how do you cultivate that your ideas and what the direction that the organization should go in when they've been doing it for the last 20 years that same way. So getting them to adjust to that.
And I think that one of the things that, Todd and I have talked a lot about, because, I do leadership coaching as well with a lot of new leaders. Leadership looks different in different spaces, right? It's not the same in every place. And I don't want to espouse that you come in and you just clean house on everything because sometimes as a leader, you grow when you have opposition if it's presented in a healthy and structured way. I think character, talked about that a little earlier, Todd. That is really what it comes down to for me. My leadership style, and it has been refined over time because I can go back to the first time I was leader, the second time I was leader, the third time I was leader, and you keep learning these things that make you become more polished around how you engage with people. The age of the people in the organization really matters as well from the perspective of what are their beliefs. A perfect example would be a form of cultural sabotage for young people is you're on a Teams meeting and they don't like what's being said and they're sending each other messages during your meeting to each other about what you're saying when you've opened up a platform for them to say it out loud. So I think when we look at organizations that we're coming into, rebuilding the organization with some of the furniture that's already existing is challenging, right? And bringing in a whole group of new people, like, okay, I'm just cleaning the house, I'm getting rid of everybody, I'm starting over. There are some bodies that are buried that you have to take into consideration that people will know about that can help you to get some low hanging fruit and experience some success. So one of the things that I think new leaders need to think about is, what are the goals of the organization? What are you trying to accomplish? Are people who are not who you like, are they good for your blind spots, right? Because sometimes people that don't see it I am a person that's highly detailed, but at the same time, I believe that you can't let detail make you have anxiety. So, I like having somebody on my team that's gonna be like, "Well, wait a minute, that needs to move over 2 inches this way." Where I'm the person like, "Oh, I can stay there, it's fine. It's 2 inches that way, it's okay." So, I like having that person that's compulsive on my team, but I have to have a relationship with them so I can harness that and make it work for my good. So, that's really where I struggle sometimes even as a year leader of I've, 30 some years in the workforce, 25 years as a leader, building relationships with people to get them to do what you need them to do, but not getting so deep into the relationship that you can't push back and get them to where you need them to be. That is such a challenge. You want to know people, hey, tell me about yourself, talk about your kids, bring in a picture of your family. But once you know all that stuff, that can impact you redirecting them in a way that's beneficial to the organization as well.
Frequently we use in this podcast the phrase building the plane while you're flying it. And I think as I think back to one of my recent positions at a statewide nonprofit, coming in there just seeing the dysfunction, a couple things. One, it's just not reality for you to fire 10 people and be the only one left, right? Just you're going to kill the organization. So you got to start picking, okay, who are the ones that I can at least work somewhat with, and who are the ones that maybe need to go right away. And literally within 8 days of starting that, I had notified one of the employees, she was the bookkeeper. She just couldn't do the job. They were $600,000 behind in billing back grants. She couldn't tell me how much money was in the bank account. I mean, it was just blunder after blunder after blunder where it just became, clear that she was not going to be the person that was going to and we were in financial straits. So my financial person couldn't handle it and we were in financial straits. So and I'll tell more about that one later, but it's just you just can't do it. You can't be the one person there. We're going to start all over again because they've got to hire 10 people. Here's the reality. 3 or 4 of the new people you hire aren't going to be quality either. So is it better to work with what you have or to try and go and start afresh and new? So Wendy, what are some of your warning signs when you start to see when would you release, coach, or reassign?
So, first you have to figure out and decide what is it that they're not performing. Is it all of their job functions? Is it just a piece of their job function? Is it just one thing? Some people like I said, I think it's up to us as leaders to figure out what our employees' strengths are, and we have to play off of those. So if there's something that they're not as good at, is that something that can be reassigned to someone else? Is that something that they can be coached at? And bring them along. Maybe they've never done it before and they're just lacking in that aspect of their job performance. So definitely sit down and see why they're struggling, what they can do. Are they interested in bettering themselves in that particular piece of their job? And then once you gather that information, then you need to decide, okay, how far along, like you said, you can't let it go on forever. If it isn't something that you can reassign because it is a big piece of their job, then you need to do that coaching with them. And then you also need to decide. I usually like to give it about 30 days. 4 weeks is plenty of time for somebody to turn around and to make an effort and see where they're still needing progress at. If it's not working after that, then you definitely need to definitely have to document. Documentation is, I've learned that a long time ago. You have to document everything. It's only going to help back you up when you do go to terminate this person because you do have a log of what's going wrong. And you owe it to that individual to give them the reason that you're terminating them. Just saying, oh, you're not working out. that's not really fair to someone. You need to say, you're not working out in this position because I need A, B, C, and D. So once you do that, but like I said, 30 days is plenty time for them to turn around and to make an effort or show, or come to you and ask, hey, what more can I do, or how do I need to adjust this anymore based on your coaching? I would say definitely within 30 days if they haven't turned that around and that is a big piece of their job. If it's not a big piece of their job and you can give it to someone else under somebody else's job position, then I would definitely do that, but also not just take it away from them because then your other employees are going to be like, well, just because they couldn't perform that job, now you're giving me their job. So you have to give and take. So if you're taking something away, definitely give them something else to put into that piece of their job description.
Yeah, I agree. And, Joe Mill, I think you've said it before, but you can't hold people accountable for something that you have not articulated, right? And that's as leaders where we have to get good because I know what's going on in my head, and I'm sure nobody else really wants to see what's going on in my head. But, if I haven't articulated that these are the expectations, then I can't hold people accountable for that. And the other thing is that I recognize now, Joe Mill, you and I worked at together on a contract basis at that statewide nonprofit to evaluate some employees. Is there was a huge leadership vacuum in that organization before I arrived. The previous leader was absent for years, and these employees were just trying to figure it out and survive. And so that played a lot into the habits that they developed. And, some of them bad, some of them good. And so we as leaders have to look at that as well, because that's something that could really form somebody into, something that, they really aren't. And Wendy, I'll add one thing I've learned, I would say 31 days, because I've learned that anybody can fake it for 30 days, but around 31 days and things start to fall apart again. That's just kind of from my experience.
What is work, right? Like, what is it? Like, are we just going to get money so we can eat and take our families on vacations? You talked about COVID and how that brings a whole nother element to things because I think a lot of people work from home. And what we found is that some people work more effectively from home, some people don't. I think I've just read an article in New York Times yesterday actually about how they're finding that younger people really need to be in the office at least 3 days a week because the promotions and the understanding the skill set and being able to work in teams and collaborate and learn from others is more prominent when they're in a space in person. I think if I were to just go back to your release coach and reassign pieces, I believe you should release people if they're not on board. In a school, I didn't always have that option because I had some parameters. But again, I've been in a different setting for the last 16 years and I have had to work my way to this. Like, this is not an easy thing to do. I've had to kind of go through the whole process, like Wendy said, of reassigning people. I keep a great network of colleagues. I'm like a senior on my side of the house, and there are other seniors that I talk to in other contracts. And I'll say, hey, I have this person and they may be good for you because my leadership style
So
can impact how people perform, right? If they're not a warm and fuzzy, if they don't wanna go to lunch, if they don't wanna do the Christmas exchange, like, I believe those cultural things change the way work happens, but everybody doesn't wanna work like that, so they might need somebody that's sterile like them that just wants to come in and do the job and leave. And there's somebody that can give them that, and I'm always trying to figure out how can I make sure people can still take care of their family. My goal is if you leave here and you don't have a job, it's not because I wasn't trying to make sure you didn't have anywhere to go. Because one man's, for lack of a nice way of saying it, one man's treasure is another man's junk. Coach, capable, interested, potential, wants support. What I find is when I get my fresh outs, my 24, 25, 26 year olds, they don't really have a connection between what work is and what college is. And they tend to not know how to do really anything without being told what to do. And if you have so you gotta either make sure you as the leader, you have the time, or you identify somebody else in the organization to put with them. And when you do that, they usually thrive. But being a self-starter, they're not teaching the kids that these days. They're coming out and they know, what color George Washington's horse was. They have all this rote memorization knowledge, but they don't really know how to apply it. And if they go to bigger colleges, they typically don't get internships and things like that. So they're coming out and they've had a job working at Myers or Walmart, and that's the only job they ever had. And then you're expecting them to come in and be a self starter and be able to jump in and do this work. So, and the other thing is they got to like you. People will not let you coach them if they don't like you. So you got to kind of understand, do they respect you? Do they really believe in what you're trying to do? And are they going to work for you?
Yeah.
And then to reassign, I think you have a lot of rock stars, and you said this, Todd, and I think it's so important. There's a lot of cronyism and nepotism that goes on more so than we think. There are a lot of people that get jobs, and I've probably even done it myself where it's like, and sometimes I've been lucky and they were really a great person, but we all have been put in positions where somebody says, "Hey, take this resume, let me know if you can do something with this person." And you're like, "Well, I got this spot, maybe I can put them here." And then what does that look like when somebody comes into the organization and they're trying to run, not walk? And I think that sometimes I've had people, and I say this to this very day, sometimes people just need a new job in the same organization. They're just in the wrong seat. What do they call it? Good to great, being in the right seat of the bus, right? So I think this is very complicated stuff that really has to be unpacked. I think our character, we keep talking about the character of the people who work for us, but we as leaders, their character has to be so beyond compare to really lead people who are not, so to speak, homogenous, like they don't naturally all fit together, because we lean into people who are more like us, right? You're going to be drawn to people who are more like you, but is that the only person that can be good for your organization?
Yeah, and, drawing back on what you said before, we as leaders, I don't want 10 Todds working for Todd, right? I want people that can help, like you said, help me with my blind spots, that are good at things that I'm not good at. Wendy was very good at that. So one thing that I battled my entire leadership is I tend to, like, I've got to learn to control this, because this will tell the whole story. Even if I'm not saying it, my eyes, my facial expressions are telling the story that's going on up here. And so as a leader, I have to really manage that, because that comes down to that trust, right? Like, if they don't trust or like you, they're not going to let you coach them. And so that's going to take us right into the human side. So I'm looking forward to the segment coming up after this one, which is the rapid fire, where we're going to just go over some examples and what would you do? Would you redeem? Would you reassign? Or would you cut bait? But before we do that, we got to talk about the human side. When it comes time to, whether it's, the worst one is letting somebody go. W How do you do that? What are the different ways you can do that? And I'll tell you, I think only twice in my career, and ever since I've been in a leadership position and had people working as part of my team, I've had the sole ability to hire and fire. I did not require anybody else's permission. But I think only twice did I fire somebody on the spot. When one was, just under a couple of years ago, but that person had abundant warning. 3 warnings. We had just come out of a monitoring with the state, and one of the zingers we got was all of our timesheets was a big issue. And so we had clearly articulated that from now on, timesheets are on the shared drive. You must fill out your timesheet every single day with a detailed description of what you did, because that's what the government wanted, and no exceptions. And so for the first, 6 weeks, we are checking them. Wendy was there with me. I'm there. Somebody's going in and checking timesheets to make sure that people are getting into the right habit. And we had one employee who worked remotely who wasn't doing it. Here we are 3 weeks into the month, and there's nothing on her timesheet. How the heck do you remember what you did 3 weeks ago and how much time you spent doing it? And we just came out of this monitoring. And so we started the product, 3 warnings, the expectation, documented it.
Mhm.
Week later, nothing changed. A direct request to complete your July timesheet today. And then another week later, and nothing. And at that point, it was just apparent that she was not doing the work. And we found out after the fact she actually was doing contract work on our time and getting paid double dipping for it. But that was one where she was just terminated immediately because it was such a high risk area. And yeah, very egregious. But usually there's other things we have to take into consideration. What are those things if really we're to the point where, okay, this person can't stay here anymore? What are some other things we have to take into consideration as leaders to make sure that we're not jeopardizing uh, the organization in other ways?
So part of it is like looking at, is it the organization? Is it your mission? Is it your style? Like, what is it that they're doing that's wrong? And is it wrong, or is it just not what you want for where you're trying to take things and what you've been charged to do? When I, just to give you a good example, when I was a principal and you actually were a part of this experience with me, one of the schools that I was at, I was hired probably for a political reason, came into the job, doing a great job. The person in charge was a very political person. And so he had not had some of the experiences that I had had. So we sometimes bumped heads on what to do because I had actually, as a school principal, I had been a teacher, and then I had been an assistant principal, and then I had been a deputy principal, and then now I'm a principal. This person was kind of like in a central office role and then became the head person. And so they sometimes how they thought things should be done weren't really clinical. It was more of, well, I just want it done because I'm trying to meet this goal. So we got along pretty good, but we would have these little scuff ups. And eventually he told me, I really think you're great. I really think you have a lot of skill. But what I'm trying to accomplish here, you're not going to do it. Like your philosophy is just totally differently on mine on things that matter to me. And I want you to leave and I will help you. And I remember my mother saying to me, she's a former retired educator, 40 years, and but she was a guidance counselor, so she was in a union, which principals are not. And she said to me, well, he can't make you leave your job. And I'm like, well, I work for him. Like he has a right to have who he wants working for him. Now, I don't want to leave my job and I don't have one, but I could kind of see where he was coming from because I wasn't going to do what he wanted me to do. I was sitting on the couch and Todd called me and he said, I don't know why you called me. You just called me out of nowhere. It was like June. And I told him what was happening. And he said, well, I know exactly where you need to apply for a job. So I applied for this job. Ironically, my boss calls me back and he's like, where have you applied? I need to know where you've applied. And I said, well, I just applied to this place. 20 minutes after I hung up with him, I get a call from that place. He had called them because he was friends with that superintendent and said, you should hire this girl. She's really good, but what she brings to the table is not going to fit my organization. Now, half my family can't stand this person. Like we have a good rapport now, but when my spouse sees him, he's like, but that changed my life in 3 ways. One, it taught me that you don't have to stay somewhere when your service is not what's going to benefit the organization. You have credentials, you can go somewhere else. One man's junk is another man's treasure. And then it taught me how to coach people out of the job. It taught me that I don't have to send people home and they can't feed their family. I can help people to go somewhere else by using my relationships. And I think that that's indelible because I think sometimes people keep people because they don't send them home so they can't feed their family and they don't use their resources to help people go somewhere else. Now, is that always going to be the case? No, you're not going to always be able to do that. But I think a lot of times you can, but it's going to take time. So, like Wendy said, when we're starting to fire and hire, we got to decide how much time we want to spend on this if we want to have outcomes that are win wins for everyone.
Yeah, I like that, using our influence or context to help them get placed somewhere else. It's always been a uh, human side for me because I probably was at least one time in the position where I'd lost a job immediately. So I had zero income effective immediately. And that's not a fun place to be. So other things that I've done is paid people out. Hey, I want to let you know this isn't going to work anymore. Today's is going to be your last day. However, we are going to pay you for the next 10 days so that you can get out there and try and find something at least in the interim so that you're not without, an income. I've even done that for contractors, that, you know, we had to let go. Hey, let's pay them for 2 more weeks. I don't want them to be instantly out of, a paycheck. So doing that or reassigning them and let them know that this isn't working. I don't have a place for you here that fits you. So during this time period, you need to be looking for another job. So it gave them time to be able to move into something else without having that instant, loss of income. So there are ways that we can do it. Like I said, I think only 2 occasions in my 30 plus years of leadership have I terminated somebody immediately on the spot without any kind of they got their vacation pay they had accrued, but that was it.
So can you go back real quick? You said that you gave them time to look for a job. So when we're talking about our people who are trying to figure out leadership, does that mean you triaged and you looked at like, okay, what damage could they possibly do or not do? And like, what is like if you said, okay, I'm going to give you 60 days or I'm going to give you 90 days, like, how did you make the decision about how long you would give them before you're saying this is your last day? And what were the factors that made you say, I'm going to let you stay longer as opposed to tomorrow?
Well, a couple things. So immediately, in this case, it was the bookkeeper. So immediately, all access was taken away for any kind of access to the books and so forth. And then we articulated that part of this process is her sharing the information. So over the course of the next month, we need you to share your knowledge with this contractor so that we're not losing that institutional knowledge and or parameters put in place. I mean, she was physically moved to another location in the office. All of her access was terminated. And it was the caveat that this will continue on so long as you have a good attitude. Because if you're undermining or doing things that you shouldn't be doing, then that's when this agreement will cease to exist. So we're doing this so you can help us to transition, but we're also trying to help you transition as well. So let's help each other, and that's how that was set up.
Usually, when we decide to terminate somebody, it would be effective immediately, but we would pay them out for 2 to 3 weeks from there. Um, I think there's like 99% of us that absolutely hate terminating people. But on the same hand, we don't want to see them or their families suffer. So we do give that severance pay, if that's what you want to call it at that point. That 2 weeks pay or 3, 4 weeks pay, but they're not in the office. So we terminate them effective immediately, but just give them that pay amount to go. And then I always tell people too that I'll definitely be able to give a reference for you, and, obviously there's certain things that you can say and not say when you're giving this information out. But most of the time, I mean, you got to try to pick what are their strengths and play on those so that when you do give that reference that you're playing on their strengths on what they have. I mean, most people aren't bad people. They do have good qualities. It just didn't fit within your organization.
Yeah, and I would agree. Like, my question is like, how can I help? Right. Like, and everybody doesn't want your help, but like I've had a situation where I had someone and clearly they just didn't our team, the way it was structured and the skill set of the team, they probably struggled more because they didn't mesh in with the team. And in their frustration, they would act out even unwittingly. So it's like, okay, let me see what I can do. So we started out on a trial basis and had them do some work with another group. And they thrived at that because that work was more aligned with their skill set. And then slowly we shifted them to that other group. And I think to me, one of the biggest things I see in the public government structure sector is that sometimes people get jobs and then the job changes. And then they can't do the job, but they need the job. So then this manifestation of different behaviors are an outcome of I'm really not well placed in this job. And I think you talked, Todd, about people giving what they do in their job, like you talked about the timesheets and writing down what you do. And I think there's a good balance in that. Like sometimes people are like, are we going to write for 5 hours about what we did for four? But I do think there's value in like every quarter, I would have my team take a day and give me everything they do and what the skill sets are to do those things. And that helped me sometimes, like you talked about earlier, Wendy, move work from different people. Cause sometimes I found like I got one person doing 8 different things, and then I have one person doing 2 things, and maybe I need to switch it so that they both are doing 4. Like there's things we can do to make people bad employees that we don't realize. Another thing I would point out is, and Todd, we've talked about this before. So people create a job description for a job, right? Do they really think about if one person can do all of those things? That's number 1, okay? And then number 2, do they look at, okay, there's 260 days in a year, and all these things be done in 1 year? So then we start to manage and assess people based on what they've done and not done, But have we really looked at, is the work aligned with the person, the skill set, the environment, the barriers that come in? So I think PIPs, performance improvement plans, things like that are really important because sometimes we find out a lot about what we've given people, and what they really can do. So I think there's two types of leadership around this fire, hire, keep, leave. One is you're coming into an organization like you, Todd, and they're telling you, I need you to do all this in 6 months, right? That's a different approach to how you maintain a staff. And everything's going really good. And you just come in and find some people that you just think, I don't really think they need to be here, but everything's going good. And then what do you do?
Yeah. And I think some other things I've had to take into consideration is in the nonprofit world is what is the impact going to be on our service to, the community if I terminate that person. So there have been times where I had to go out and find and recruit a replacement before I could actually act on. So I've had to tolerate people who were just disrespectful, blatantly swearing at me in staff meetings. Yeah, I mean it was like should have been on the spot fired, but that would have had too big of an impact on the people that we were serving. And so I needed to find a replacement before I could actually act on that. Or there was another one where we were coming up on an event, an advocacy event, and what this person did deserved immediate termination. They went around me and complained directly to the executive committee of the board, which is a no-no. It was not an ethical issue. It was a I disagree with his day-to-day operational decisions and should have been an immediate termination, but I felt that it would have jeopardized that event that I had never done before in my life. And so had to wait until that event was over before I terminated that contract. So there are other things that you can't just, man, that person made me so mad. I just want to like fire them right now. That's a rarity. That rarely happens. And it's probably good because it allows us to insert more of that human aspect that we've been talking about. How do you do it in a humane way? Because that's the way we would want to be treated, right? Well, let's move into our round robin where we're going to get some scenarios and each of us is just going to respond whether you would keep and coach this person, reassign them, or cut bait. So, and then just maybe like a one sentence why, and then we'll move on to the next one. So, scenario number one, you've got a high performer who brings in big grants, but openly mocks new initiatives and rolls their eyes in staff meetings when you're talking. Keep, coach, reassign, or cut bait.
Coach.
Coach.
Coach. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's, a first for me is you try to coach. And the first thing you're trying to do is determine are they coachable, right? Do they want to be coached? So I think, we would all agree, coach them, help them understand, articulate what they're doing and the behavioral changes you would like to see. That'd be my approach.
But then that goes back to also how long do you keep a toxic person before you start losing good people?
Yeah, and that's true, and that's almost like a gut issue, but it's more than one thing, right? If this just started, what else is going on in their life, right? But if it's a continual time after time after time of toxicity, yeah, that's setting the stage.
Yeah, and I think just one quick sentence I'd add is that sometimes if not everybody thinks they're a pain in the patootie, but everybody knows they do this thing good, I'm more inclined to keep them than if people would listen to them and then become a part of the fire and brimstone committee. So if they're just a pain in the butt and everybody knows they're a diva, I might leave them over there by themselves as opposed to if they could infect the rest of the group and get them to go in a negative way.
Yeah, I agree. All right, scenario number two, beloved but chronically late. So you've got a beloved staff, they're loved by the other staff and clients, and but they consistently miss deadlines that affect service delivery, funding reports, and they only provide the CEO information that they want to. So they're withholding information. Coach, reassign, or release.
I would probably reassign with those the 31-day deadline. Just because, I mean, it, your funding reports and stuff, as you talked about before, Todd, I mean, all that stuff has to be done in a timely manner in order for you to continue to get the funding that you need.
And a lot of people who are really good at doing the work are not good with deadlines. And I try to find the most, for lack of a nicer word, my OCDers. I give them stuff like that because they thrive and love that stuff. And sometimes we try to give everybody everything when we should kinda sometimes, what do you wanna call that, like, narrow out or silo out certain tasks because they really are tied to a personality type.
Yeah, I agree. I
It's
agree.
up to us as leaders to make sure the people under us are doing a great job.
All right. Number three, a 20-year employee who is loyal, knows the history of their organization, but quietly resists every new system or change that you try to make. And they're telling others behind your back, just don't worry, this will blow over. Coach, reassign, or release.
Release after I get the information. Methodical release, a methodical release.
Yeah.
Agree
Yeah.
with that.
I think that's, you're not going to be able to coach that behavior out of that person. But like you said, as much as you may want to do an immediate termination, there's certain things you got to take into consideration, and that historical knowledge is got to be retained. So I agree. All right. So you're 6 months in with a new hire and they're still learning, they're making mistakes, but consistently asking for feedback, taking notes, and improving slowly. Coach, reassign, or release.
Coach and give them a mentor.
That's what I was gonna say, probably mentor somebody, reassign some things. Like I said, trying to figure out what their best qualities are and why are they not able to perform for the job that you hired them for. So that's a why did we hire them question.
Yeah. Well, and I think, Tromel, you hit on something too, that we're seeing a much different person come out of college these days. And it's taking a lot more mentoring than when I got my first, career job. I've always been just a go getter, right? Overachiever, go getter, do what I need to do. And I think that we need to recognize as leaders that, we need to pour into people more, especially the first time career job folks. All right. The silent saboteur. So they never confront you directly, but you hear from three different people that they're saying leadership doesn't know what they're doing. Do you coach, reassign, or cut bait?
So, unfortunately, I usually try to coach those people, but that is so hard because some of it is coming from other people. So you gotta be careful about acting on it, and typically those people who do that, 1, they're not gonna ever admit they said it, and 2, people who told you are afraid to say, "Yeah, they said it." They told you in confidence, and they're never gonna admit that in public, and, so that's a challenging one for me. I struggle with that tremendously. I've had some situations like that, and, they're very troubling to me. I don't know. I think I would wonder what, I try to use human resources. We haven't talked about that. Try to pull them in and see if they can get more information to give me guidance on how to proceed.
Yeah. Something I learned back from when Joe Mill, you and I worked together with bullying prevention in the schools is I love the line because you had the same issue when you had somebody report bullying, right? That you didn't want to give somebody's name that they reported it. Something that works very well. Several people have reported to me that you have been saying this behind my back. And I find two things with that. One, it still gives you that credibility that it's been reported. I'm just not making this up. And number two, you'd be shocked how many people are surprised that you're being that direct with them. And that's enough to shock some people into changing their behavior. Like if you're going to keep calling them on the carpet because they're doing this behind your back, then that's going to cause them to change. Not everybody, and those are the ones that I think you eventually release that, you're just continually having to confront them with, this gossip and stuff they're doing behind the back. Number 6, a top performer who used to be amazing and now is clearly burned out, cynical, and snapping at colleagues. Do you coach, reassign, or release?
I would probably do a coaching to release. And the only reason for that is is there something going on outside that's influencing or affecting their performance? And we don't know. Sometimes at that point, maybe they do need reassigned because they are burnout in that particular position they're in.
Yeah, I've had some situations like that and I reassign and then coach. Sometimes people typically they're ready to go, but they're waiting on that to get that 67 or that 65 or that 62. And so sometimes when you give them a leadership role, they're less critical because they have access to more information that allows them to see why you're doing what you're doing, and they can really become an ally. So I've found that to be sometimes it doesn't work, but I found that to be a good strategy.
Yeah. And see, I look. I kind of take a different perspective on that one. So I would definitely coach, but I would also be reflecting on my leadership and where did I miss that? That somebody that reports to me is burned out. Because as a leader, I would hope that I would recognize that much sooner and then start to coach them on how to avoid that burnout. And so I would almost take some ownership. Hey, surprise, I'm wearing my Own It hat today. I would take some ownership in it. How did I let that? I mean, I should have saw that this person was doing too much, getting involved in too much, had too much on their plate, and as a leader, should have stepped in earlier to avoid. As somebody who's been burnt out before, so I definitely would coach and I would take some ownership in that as well.
So other than the last week, Miss Jomo, or well, it's been longer than that, as you said, November 14th. But how have you been doing?
Going to jump into the next scenario, and we're talking about the drama magnet. So every conflict somehow has their name on it, and that they're always present themselves as the victim, always involved in the drama, frequently starting the drama. Do you reassign, coach, or cut bait?
Coach.
I would
Because
say
that's
cook.
gonna always come up. I mean, people are people, and I think that you're always gonna have that dynamic even when you root it out, somebody else will come and step into that role, and I think it's more about the culture you promote and how you talk about conflict resolution, working with others. I think it's a behavior that people are inclined to lean into when the organization is changing and shifting. And I think it's something that is extremely coachable. And I think that some leaders thrive off of that, the chaos theory. They keep a whole bunch of stuff going so that they can control different groups of people for different reasons. So I think it can be something that people learn in the workplace and you have to help them unlearn.
I would probably look at reassigning them. However, they're going to take those conflicts with them to wherever you reassign. So you just need to coach and make sure that they're on track with that. If things don't change, then obviously it'd be looking at release at some point.
Yeah, I agree. I do the coach with my eyes on that 31st day, help them identify that this drama is causing a toxic environment and this needs to change. And if it doesn't change, then we will be making a change. So I
And I
think
think
very direct with that.
one thing I found with drama is that I do professional development. So there's a really good book by Patrick Lencioni called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. And he writes all his books in the form of a fable, and it's like a story with these characters, and they all have these personalities that feed into what the culture is in the organization. So they have little video clips and stuff like that, so I use them, and then Arbinger, I also use the Arbinger Institute and try to find, like, these snippets and then make it a conversation with the whole group, because sometimes the people that cause drama, the other people need to know you're talking to them about it, and because it's infectious. We all wanna complain about something, you know what I mean, at some point in our day.
It's easier to
Yeah.
find the negative than it is the positive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I agree. All right. So here's one, the board's favorite, but it's the culture's nightmare. An employee the board loves because of history, but the staff are quietly telling you this person is toxic and unsafe. Do you reassign, coach, or cut bait?
Bait.
Well, I'm torn because it depends on if the board member is gonna be mad at you that they're gone and how they can impact your life. Is it their cousin or a neighbor?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And but here's what I've learned. A board hires you to lead. So let me lead. And if I'm coming to you saying, because I would always, especially on high profile ones, I would give my board brief saying, this is what's happened. This is what I'm doing. I'm just informing you. Because in the end, the board doesn't have anything to do with day to day and hiring and firing decisions. That is the executive director's job and their job alone. So when a board starts to lean on you, that's not fair. You brought me here to lead. Let me lead. And that's probably more the having bent the other way where I was kind of like, "Wow, I really can't do that because of the board," has really taught me that, no, you need to take the stand as a strong leader and do what, you feel is right. So, okay, here we're gonna and this is a real one. This really happened.
A
The
deer?
end run. A former employee, now turned contractor, disagrees with your day-to-day decisions uh, about an event that she's responsible for planning. She fires off an email to the board executive committee to protect her reputation. Do you coach, reassign, or release? Cut bait.
It's a contract worker.
Yeah. In my world, I would say cut bait. In this situation, I think I alluded to it earlier. She was planning an event I had never done before, so I had to wait until that event was over, and then I just terminated the contract. Um, because that's just something in the nonprofit world that you don't that's like somebody who works for you goes around you and says something to your boss. That's not appropriate. That's not the chain of command. And here's why I would cut bait. Every single leadership position I've been in the nonprofit, I make it perfectly clear to everybody that works for me that this is how it works. The only time that you have permission to go around me and communicate directly to the board is if you're concerned about an ethical violation on my part. If it's about anything else, that comes through me. I'm responsible for day to day. The board has hired me to lead this organization. And I also tell my board the same thing. And I use that same example of if you were at work and you had somebody that worked for you and they went around you and directly to the vice president to report something that was not an ethical issue, how would you feel? And every single time I've used that, board members said, "Oh, no, 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 no. That is not how it works." I said, "Exactly. We need to keep things tight so that, we don't have all this side conversation going around where misinformation is being communicated." And I've had to deal with that a couple times at a couple nonprofits.
Now, in my environment, firing, we do try our best to use, the protocols around, employment rights and things like that. So I've never just gotten rid of people. I have had people that have gone around me to people who are in the corporate structure above me. What I try to do is be very aware of when people are not happy and kind of, what's the word, socialize the people above me that these people may come and that when they come, that they need to send them back to me. I think that tattletelling is a behavior that is very common with employees if they feel like they have some type of access. I don't necessarily, in my space, know that I would fire someone for something like that. I think in your space, it's a little different with boards, but teachers tell the board members stuff all the time. So if that was the case, no, we wouldn't have any teachers. And then in the environment I'm in now, I think that what I try to do is get people to understand. I'd be probably more mad at the board member for not stopping them and allowing them to continue the conversation and redirecting them back to me.
Well,
Right.
that was the double whammy in that situation because the board president engaged that contractor with multiple emails. And the second part of that was my final thing that decided it was time for me to go. Because if I don't have a board member that has my back, when we've already discussed about how if something like this happens, how it should be handled, should have been redirected back to me. We have nothing to do with day-to-day operations, but she continued to engage with her. And so it was not only that, it was like, all right, I'm done because that's not the response that I would expect from a board president.
Yeah, the world of
Well,
work is really a challenging space. I mean, everybody doesn't come to work for the same reasons. I think I said this at the beginning. I think the higher up you go, the more educational experiences you have, the more training you have, it changes the way that you look at work. People who have families, who have children, people who have families and they have proper support or they don't have appropriate support, all of that feeds into how they see the job. Our philosophies about extrinsic or intrinsic motivation, why people do a good job on their work. Those are all like philosophical things. You talked about being late to work, late to a project, late to completing something. Those all are very different things. And I think that what has to happen when you're a leader is that you always have to investigate. You always got to, and like you said, Wendy, one thing I hate about having to put people in a position where we're discussing their employment is that you do have to document. Like, can you not make work for me? Like, just do your job and let's just move
it's
on. Cause now I gotta spend 3 extra hours writing down everything you said. Like, I don't have time for that. And that's the part where sometimes as leaders, we let things get out of control. And you talked about that, Todd, even when you alluded to burnout, not realizing where people are, their current state. And I think that that's the hardest part of the job, spending a lot of time examining everybody and knowing where they are, checking the temperature. And that's the part where we can let things get away from us. One thing I will say working in a school, that children change the way that adults behave. So you have more subversive things when you have all adults because they don't have anybody that distracts them. That's what I have found if I compare and contrast the two environments. It's easier to manage adults when they have some tangible thing they're responsible for than when they just have each other. So if you have a nonprofit, like, and you have children or you have clients that you serve or you have other groups that you go to, you have to take more into consideration than when you have an environment where you're just cranking out products, static products.
I agree. So as we are closing, let's talk about some of the takeaways. What are one principle that you want leaders to remember when they're deciding whether to fish or cut bait? And mine would be that we are leaders are hired to protect the mission and the people, not to protect people's positions. And I think we all have to realize that, including us as a leader. I leave tomorrow, things are going to continue on, and more than likely they'll continue to improve and get better. And so we as leaders need to be focused on the organization and our clients first. And how is this termination, because that's what we control. Somebody could turn around and resign tomorrow, we can't control that. But if we're actually choosing to cut bait with somebody, how is it going to affect our organization, our clients? When I take a look at my faith as well, it's a balance between grace and truth. Grace, I need to see the potential. I need to see the human side. That's been a real growth point for me. I mean, earlier in my leadership career, man, I was just very much a black and white, cut and dry. It's just, one or the other. And I've really learned to look at the human face and the human factor and how it affects people. But the truth is that we can't, as leaders, let people damage the mission or the people that we're serving.
Right.
And so sometimes we're in that difficult decision where we've got to decide to cut bait with some folks. And like I said at the top of the podcast, that is probably the most difficult leadership decision you'll ever make. How about you guys? One principle that you want leaders to remember when they have to decide to fish or
One
cut bait.
thing one thing that I look at definitely is don't let it consume your time. If it's time consuming and you're constantly documenting and taking away from the organization or the people that you're serving, it's time to cut that bait. So the time consuming piece of it for me is the deciding factor on how to handle the situations.
For me, if it's not something illegal, then I always start with coaching. If it's something that is not going to cause me to, lose my job because you did this egregious or negligible thing, then I try to start with coaching. I think I've learned, like you were talking about, Todd, how you've grown. I've grown in understanding that sometimes, as Wendy said, if you got to spend that much time on it, you need to let it go. I think one of the things that I'm trying to get better at is having a good balance on how I manage small groups of people. I come from a background, my mom and my dad had the same jobs. They're, same work for the same organizations their entire career. So I have lots of friends and family members that are really not family members because they've known me since my mother started this job or they've known me since my dad was in college. And so I tend to take the humanistic approach and really want to understand people. But sometimes when you get too deeply connected to people, you can't make really good decisions about whether they're good for the organization because you're thinking about their position and how it's good for them. And that's one of the things that I try to refine each time I get a new opportunity to reset, making sure that I have clear boundaries in the relationships I have with people I supervise because it can become a conflict when things don't go well.
That's it for us today with Leading from the Lake House Leadership Unfiltered. I am Todd Waltz, and we were here with Dr. Joe and Wendy Reichert. And until next time, when we'll see you at the lake.
Life's not over, we're just changing lanes, and we're a few years older, but we're driving down the same old